What's the most absurd reason you've heard of someone canceling their marriage? He was a fugitive on the run and finally got caught. He was wanted in the US, lived in Canada in a border town, Sault Ste. Marie, and definitely knew to stay away from US customs. But the dummy wanted cheaper alcohol for the upcoming wedding event. He traveled back and forth between Ontario and Michigan, and they typically just waved him through. Right before his wedding, though, something felt suspicious, so they checked his identity and discovered his documents were false and he was using an alias. Everyone at his workplace knew him as Lee MacGyver, the alias name he created for himself because it sounded cool, for years, but his real name was Mitchell Connolly. Obviously, the wedding was canceled after his arrest. There are plenty of other stories about this guy, too, and Lee was a real POS. As a supervisor in a call center, he once coordinated a raffle for a high-end computer gaming system. The gaming PC was set up in a central area for employees to see, company resources were used to promote the raffle, and he sold thousands of tickets. I recall sales being over $20,000. The winner of the computer system ended up being his next-door neighbor. Then about a week later, coworkers discovered that he kept the gaming PC himself. When questioned, he said that he bought it from his neighbor. The raffle money disappeared too. While he was in prison, he didn't like the behavior of the warden and prisoner guards, so he thought it would be a great idea to create a journal and log all their activities and corrupt practices. He was always doing shady stuff like that in his old job too. Documenting employees and trying to get people in trouble, for example. The thing is, he wasn't going to be spending much time in prison. It was like less than a year, but he thought he could benefit somehow by writing down everything they did and what he witnessed in prison. I suppose he thought he could sell it to the media or write a book about his prison experiences. Anyways, prison guards discovered his book and the warden was furious. They extended his stay by another year. Story 2. In history, there have been numerous instances where marriages were canceled for various reasons, some of which might seem absurd by today's standards. However, this one stands out that severed ties between Prussia and Great Britain. In 1727, King George II of Great Britain arranged a marriage between his son, Frederick, Prince of Wales, and Princess Wilhelmina of Prussia, and the alliance was meant to strengthen political ties between the two countries. Nevertheless, the marriage was cancelled due to a dispute over the terms of the wedding contract, and the British insisted that the princess would have to renounce her Lutheran faith and convert to Anglicanism, which was the official religion of the British monarchy. Princess Wilhelmina refused. The negotiations collapsed. The cancellation of the marriage between Frederick, Prince of Wales, and Princess Wilhelmina of Prussia had several significant consequences in subsequent events. The cancellation of the marriage hurt the political relations between Great Britain and Prussia. King George II of Britain, who had orchestrated the alliance, was disappointed by the breakdown of the negotiations. Also, the failed marriage arrangement strained the diplomatic ties between the two countries, leading to a period of tension and mistrust, and repercussions affected both Frederick and Wilhelmina on a personal level, who had initially shown enthusiasm for the marriage and were deeply disappointed. He harbored resentment towards his father, King George II, for his interference in the matter and blamed him for the collapse of the alliance, and the incident further strained the already troubled relationship between father and son. Not only did Frederick hate his father for this action, it also had political ramifications, as the cancelled marriage had broader political implications for an alliance between Great Britain and Prussia was intended to counterbalance the influence of other European powers, such as France. With the collapse of the marriage negotiations, the geopolitical landscape in Europe shifted, and the British lost a potential ally in Prussia. Both Frederick and Wilhelmina went on to form other marital alliances. Frederick married Princess Augusta of Saxe-Gotha in 1736, and despite initial tensions, the marriage proved successful and had several children, including the future King George III of Great Britain, and Wilhelmina, on the other hand, eventually married the Margrave of Bayreuth, Charles Frederick, in 1731. This marriage brought stability and happiness to her life, as the failed marriage between Frederick and Wilhelmina had long-lasting repercussions in the British monarchy and the House of Hanover. Frederick's strained relationship with his father, King George II, persisted until Frederick passed away in 1751, and the subsequent generations of the British royal family faced ongoing tensions and power struggles, culminating in the strained relationship between George III, who was Frederick's son. Story 3. My niece's fiancé and father of her child called off the wedding about 2 weeks before because my niece had lost too much weight after having gastric bypass surgery. To be fair, he had expressed his feelings before she had surgery, saying if he'd want a skinny woman, he'd never would have dated her to begin with. Losing the weight did change her. She'd always been very sweet and friendly, but she became quite full of herself and quite difficult to be around after. She has no problem telling anyone that she's the most gorgeous person in the room. I love her, but she's not. She also traded her food fixation for a substance and alcohol dependency. She bought a house, married some other dude, divorced, lost her home, rehabbed 3 times that I know of, and is now a Jesus freak, but still a hot mess. Her child's dad dodged a hell of a bullet. Oh god, the child. Story 4. Literally on an old program called Ventrilo. It was a voice chat program before any other things we use today, and used to play World of Warcraft online, a popular online game. Had this guildmaster just before I made my own guild with a friend I used to have. His wife was going to leave him because literally every night, not a word of lie, it was World of Warcraft and beer was more important than her. And I mean, she gave him chance after chance. I was only a guildie, someone who's not really important to the guild but yet still may join, and I tried telling him love is more important than some game. But oh no, he was 16, I was 14 or 15. What do I know, right? Lol. Marriage is a 2-person thing, everyone. Takes 2 to tango. Games are all fine and dandy, but man, when your lady's no longer asking nicely and threatening to divorce, man, wow, love for a video game. Love for me. Another one, it's not super absurd because the rules were clearly laid out to the couple beforehand, but the Catholic Church is really strict about behavior before a wedding. The groom and his groomsmen were getting dressed at the church, and one of the guys had a bottle of whiskey, so they all took one shot to celebrate. Well, someone from the church saw them and told the priest. Because they had consumed alcohol, he called off the ceremony. The bride's father was so upset he got refunds on as much as he could and refused to pay another penny for the reschedule. The bride was humiliated and wasn't getting any money from her parents anymore, so she called the entire thing off, gave the engagement ring back to him, and moved out a couple days later. Story 5. My grandfather went to fight in World War II. He proposed to his girlfriend of 2 years before he left and said they'd marry once he returned. She assumed he would pass and started dating someone else. He came back and found out, and obviously that was that. They both married in one time of their lives. 30 or so years later, both of their spouses had passed away and they got back together. They got married a couple of years later. She was a massive My parents said she was super nice and really good with my sister and I at first, and then once they had married, she turned cold. My grandfather was very wealthy as he got a job at an electronic company when he returned from the war and moved up the ranks to just below the CEO. She married him for his money, knowing he wouldn't divorce her because they grew up looking down on that. When he developed Alzheimer's, she forged his signature and drained most of what he had saved as inheritance for all his grandchildren. She was a horrible person. Screw you, Ginny. Similar story for my friend happened in 2 families related to her. Number 1, her husband's grandfather got married, had a few kids, wife passed away. He remarried and had a few more kids. They raised all of the kids together and life was great. When the kids were all in their 50s and 60s, he passed away. Everybody was sad, but the whole family coped together. When his second wife passed, she completely cut out her stepchildren and their families and gave everything to her biological children only. All of the children got together and said screw that and split everything equally among all siblings. What a two-faced a-hole. Number 2, her grandmother's family in the South. She doesn't know all of the exact details, but her grandmother's great-grandmother, she wants to say late 1700s, early 1800s, had a similar situation. The father was a very wealthy southern plantation owner, but after having a few kids, his wife passed. He remarried and had a few more kids. When he passed, and eventually she did too, everything was only given to her biological children. She finds it interesting that 2 such similar situations happened so many years apart. Guess stepmothers have always been selfish and evil. Certainly not all by any means, but they definitely exist. Guess those fairy tales have some truth to them after all. Story 6. My grandpa was having his 4th wedding on his 67th birthday to his 26-year-old yoga instructor in Hawaii. They lived there, but we didn't. The whole family flies out to see him. The night before the wedding, Grandpa passed away while he and his fiancée are celebrating their future together. My uncle stepped out of the hospital where Grandpa was declared deceased of a heart attack and looked at all of us soberly for a moment. Well, wedding's canceled. We're having him cremated tonight and we'll have a funeral tomorrow. McFly, you're coming with me to every fabric store in town to find some black fabric for the venue. Girls, go get the cake and flowers in the morning. My older cousin ended up marrying the fiancé within months because he reminds me so much of your grandpa. They have the same energy and soul. The 2 of them moved to Nebraska and bought a goat farm. They have 12 kids now, 22 years later. The youngest was born last Christmas. You know what? This is actually wholesome. In a weird, hilarious way, but wholesome. And since you're already here, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Now let's go ahead and get back to the video. Story 7. The groom's mother had a bad dream about her teeth falling out. Mind you, he was 32 and his mother had that dream when he was around 5 years old. But literally an hour before the wedding, he just randomly thought about his mom talking about that dream at the breakfast table all those years ago. And, well, yeah, left the bride waiting at the altar. Afterwards, he tried convincing everyone, especially those of us who wanted our damn money back from him, he was right and why. The fallout was massive. However, it was a really lucky thing for the bride because she has a much better life going on with a far better husband than she would have ever had with the groom. Seriously, he's my cousin and has just been nothing but complete dumpster fire trash since. Another one, about 2 months before the wedding, the guy suggests spending some time apart, only getting together once a week for supper, and catching up on some wedding itinerary just to make sure everything will work out fine in the relationship. She's a little hesitant at first because they already experienced long stretches apart in their relationship because of his job in the oil field, but she eventually agrees. Everything comes to a crashing halt about 2 weeks before the wedding. The only reason he had suggested it is because there was a woman from school they both knew and he wanted to get with her without getting caught. She found out and responded by recording her getting it from a guy they both knew and sending it to him. She capped off the video by saying, "This is all that's left since you decided to mess that witch." Her name. Story 8. 2 stories come to mind. Number 1, my friend's former fiancé was a nice dude. Firefighter, easy to talk to, treated her well and got her a nice ring. Every now and then the ring would go missing, but he would eventually find it, safe and sound. She had a good job too and was giving him thousands of dollars a month to fix up a house they had bought to live in after they'd gotten married. Turns out dude was living 2 lives, or attempting to at the very least. He's married for 10 plus years and had 2 kids. The engagement ring was his wife's and he stole it back every now and then to find it for her. There was never a house. He never bought one, and used all the thousands he had been given solely on substances. Needless to say, they canceled the wedding. Number 2. They did nothing. They picked a date, sent mails with it to invite people, and then did nothing until a week before said date. Of course, they could not rent the venue they wanted nor find another one. They couldn't find a caterer, dresses, etc. on time, but also legally they couldn't get married in such short notice. So they canceled the wedding and will get married later. It's been 5 years. They're still not married. Story 9. I was at the bachelor party when the text came in. She was calling off the wedding that was in 1 week. Because we're super nerds, we decided on going to arcade hopping around LA instead of bar hopping. I drove because I'm the sober friend. She was at her bachelorette party in Vegas at the same time with like 8 of her closest friends. We all met in the afternoon and drove to the earliest closing arcade. Fiancé was texting pics of the girls at a Vegas show. He started texting pics back. It was cute. They both kept it up through the night. At about 8 p.m. she stopped. We figured they were at a show where a camera should be away and he kept sending fun pics. At 9:30, he got like 4 super long texts in a row while I was driving to a barcade. Everyone was a couple beers in for the night as the last place was also a barcade. Turns out after group discussion with the girls, she did not want to raise a child husband. He would have to give up video games and D&D and get adult hobbies. There was some long explanation that I feel like was being fed to her by her friends. He said they should talk when back and it was not something to figure out that night while they were out having fun. She said, agree or no wedding. He said no wedding. An arcade adventure where the guys got his wedding canceled. She was mad he would not discuss it when she got back and tried to tell him she was buzzed and someone else sent the text and she didn't mean it. But man, that was a wild ride that night. Another story. He told my good friend the day before the wedding that she had to give up her job and stay at home because he just wanted someone to take care of him and the kids when they arrived, and that he was only marrying her because of that. Some months before that, he'd pressured her to give up her job after she got married, which she refused to do, and he told her then that he'd make her give it up, but she thought he was joking, which really shocked me. The relationship was toxic. I was surprised she was still going through with it. She finally promised him she'd give up her job, but her dad overheard the whole thing and intervened, and she saw sense and backed out of the wedding. She's married now to someone pretty wonderful. No idea what happened to him. Story 10. This isn't quite the same thing, but I dated a girl seriously and I thought we were going to get married. We started talking about it and I started looking at rings, and I made some comment about how I was happy to choose a ring. But if she had any input about what she wanted, I'd be happy to hear it. She said, "Oh, I have my ring picked out." I said, "Oh, okay, well, what is it so I can go get that for you then?" And she said, "No, I picked my ring out years ago. The right guy will see it and know it's the one I want. If you can't figure it out, then you're clearly not the one." I was like, "I'm not about to go buy a ring and just hope it's the one you picked out years ago." And she said, "Well, then I guess you're not the one." And ended the relationship. I'm fine with it. My wife now doesn't expect me to be a psychic. Well, you dodged a psycho bullet there, buddy. Story 11. I have 2. Number 1, because both he and her were broke and from broken families. The wedding went forward, but they found out in their honeymoon that each was marrying the other because of their prospective family wealth. But it turned out each family's money was a sham. They had all borrowed and mortgaged heavily to keep up appearances and pay for the expensive wedding and honeymoon. They'd expected their son and daughter to cripple their spouse financially. Bride and groom cut honeymoon short, returning separately, fuming at each other's scam, and desperate to annul or divorce. Both entire families all went through bankruptcy and foreclosures soon after. Got kicked out of their country clubs, relatives' marriages broke up, students were pulled from private schools, luxury cars were repossessed. The mayhem, destruction, and carnage went on and on all summer. It was the talk of the town. Number 2. My cousin had a dream that her fiancé cheated on her. She thought this was a sign, so went on a deep dive to prove that he was being unfaithful. She checked his phone, social media, emails, browser history, store receipts, etc., put a tracker in their shared car. She even went so far as to get a friend to follow him from his work to the pub, sit there all night whilst he had drinks with his colleagues, and follow the designated driver back to his home. There was absolutely no proof he was cheating. There weren't even any inconsistencies with his timetable. Anyway, the morning of the wedding, she paid a psychic to turn up and give her a tarot reading whilst getting strapped into her dress. The bloody psychic said a very wishy-washy, maybe keep your romantic options open comment. And my cousin took this as a divine revelation that she shouldn't marry the guy. So she left, without telling the groom. Just took off her ring, called an Uber, and got off with her mom in tow, still wearing her dress. Story 12. Time for the brief story of Grandma's second husband. They just got married and checked into a hotel, and the new hubby went to get ice. Grandma asks for a Coke, but he returns without one, claiming there's no soda machine in the hall. She goes to bed thirsty and gets up in the morning to look for herself, and sure enough, there is one. Grandma goes back drinking a Coke, and he asks where she got it from. She says, "Right next to the freaking ice machine, you cheapskate sob. I'm out." Or some version of that. Files for an annulment the next day. Of course, my mom said really it's because she loved the man who later became number 3, my grandpa Don. But he was 12 years younger, yada yada yada, but that's how my grandma left her husband over a Coke. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. Catch you in that video.